Chapter 1: The Breached Gate. The perimeter fence, what remained of it, sagged inward like a broken jaw. Jack spat on the cracked concrete, the wind whipping his gray-streaked hair across his face. "Place is more chewed up than I remembered." Lena, her hand resting on the worn grip of her pulse rifle, scanned the overgrown landscape beyond the breach. Sensors picking up anything. Marcus, hunched over his wrist-mounted device, adjusted the settings. Just static mostly, interference. Something's messing with the signals inside. He chewed on his lip, a nervous habit Jax had witnessed countless times. Could be the plant life. The dome was supposed to have advanced bioshielding, but, well, look at it. Beyond the rusted fence, the Biome Dome colony sprawled, a skeletal framework swallowed by rampant vegetation. Twisted trees pierced the shattered panes of what had once been a transparent ceiling, their branches intertwined with thick, pulsating vines. The air hung heavy with humidity and the sickly sweet scent of decaying flora. It had been over 40 years since contact was lost with the colony. Rumors, legends even, had grown around it, tales of genetic experiments gone wrong, of a paradise turned poisonous. The official line had always been environmental disaster, a contained failure. Jax knew better. There was always more to it than that. That was why he was here. "Let's move," Jax ordered, gesturing toward the breach. "Raise your point. Lena, your rear. Marcus, keep that sensor working. Sailors, you stay close, watch our flanks. Zara, do you have to add something?" Reyes, his youthful face pale with nervous anticipation, hefted his rifle and stepped through the opening. "I think I hear something." "What do you hear?" "Something that sounds big." Lena moved up beside Jax. "He's green, Jax. Needs to learn how to filter what's important." Jax nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the overgrown path leading into the dome. He could feel it, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the sense of being watched. The air itself seemed to hum with a strange energy. The dome was still alive in a way, but it was not the life they were supposed to find there. They advanced cautiously, Reyes leading the way. The path, once a neatly paved walkway, was now a tangled mess of roots and vines. The air grew thicker, heavier, making each breath a conscious effort. Marcus continued to fiddle with his sensor, muttering under his breath. Silas lumbered behind, his heavy boots crushing the undergrowth. Zara moved silently through the trees, a shadow flitting between the thick trunks. A sudden screech tore through the air, followed by a flurry of movement in the canopy above. Reyes flinched, nearly dropping his rifle. "Vine striders," Zara hissed from the trees. "3 of them, big ones." Before anyone could react, the creatures dropped from the branches, landing with sickening thuds. They were larger than any primate Jax had ever seen, their bodies elongated and contorted, their limbs grotesquely muscled. Their eyes glowed with a feral intelligence, and their teeth were bared in a silent snarl. "Open fire," Jax barked, raising his own weapon. The air filled with the staccato roar of pulse rifles. The vine striders, despite their size, were incredibly agile. They dodged and weaved through the barrage of energy blasts, leaping from tree to tree. One of them closed on Reyes, its clawed hand reaching for his throat. Lena reacted instantly, firing a burst of energy that struck the creature in the chest. It staggered back, momentarily stunned, giving Reyes the opportunity to retreat. Another vine strider landed directly in front of Sila's, its teeth sinking into his armored shoulder. The brute roared in pain, swinging his massive fists. He connected with the creature's head, sending it crashing to the ground. But the damage was done. The vine strider's teeth had penetrated Silas's armor. Jax focused on the remaining vine strider, tracking its movements with practiced precision. He fired a steady stream of energy, driving the creature back toward the trees. It snarled in frustration, then vanished into the dense foliage. The fight was over in a matter of seconds, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. The only sound was the labored breathing of the scavengers and the distant hum of the dome's unseen machinery. Jax surveyed the scene. Reyes was shaking but unharmed. Silas was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Marcus was still fiddling with his sensor, oblivious to the danger. Zara had vanished back into the trees. "Silas, you hit bad," Jax asked. "Just a scratch," Silas grunted, but Jax could see the pain in his eyes. "Armor took most of it." "Maya, check him out," Jax ordered. "Lena, Reyes, secure the perimeter. Marcus, what's that sensor telling you?" Maya, her face grim, knelt beside Silas. She examined the wound, her touch gentle but efficient. "It's worse than a scratch. Those things have something nasty in their saliva. It's already starting to swell." Marcus, finally looking up from his device, shook his head. "Still nothing. The interference is getting worse. I can barely get a signal out." Jax cursed under his breath. They were cut off, deep inside a hostile environment, and they had already taken a casualty. This wasn't going to be easy. Zara reappeared from the trees, her face grim. "More coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I see at the least 6. Jax clenched his fist. "Time to move. We need to find a defensible position." He pointed deeper into the dome. "There, that structure, looks like some kind of control station. We'll make our stand there." They pressed onward, Reyes and Lena leading the way, their rifles raised. Silas limped behind, Maya supporting him. Marcus trailed behind, his sensor beeping uselessly. Zara disappeared into the trees, acting as a scout. As they moved deeper into the dome, the environment grew increasingly bizarre. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches adorned with pulsating growths. Strange, bioluminescent fungi illuminated the path, casting an eerie glow. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the sound of unseen creatures rustling in the undergrowth. They reached the control station, a cylindrical structure of reinforced concrete, partially buried in the overgrowth. The entrance was blocked by a collapsed section of the roof, but Jax could see a potential opening on the other side. "Lena, clear the entrance," Jax ordered. "Silas, Marcus, set up a perimeter. Reyes, you're with me. We're going inside." Lena nodded and stepped forward, unleashing a stream of energy that blasted away the debris blocking the entrance. Silas and Marcus, despite their injuries and fear, set about securing the perimeter. Jax and Reyes squeezed through the opening, entering the control station. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. A single shaft of light pierced the gloom, illuminating a bank of consoles covered in dust and grime. "This place gives me the creeps," Reyes muttered, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Stay sharp," Jax warned. "We don't know what we'll find in here." He activated his helmet's light, illuminating the interior. The consoles were covered in dials, switches, and screens, most of which were broken or corroded. Wires dangled from the ceiling, and the floor was littered with debris. As Jax swept his light across the room, he noticed something strange, a symbol etched into the wall near one of the consoles. It was a complex, geometric design, unlike anything he had ever seen. It seemed to pulse with a faint energy, a subtle vibration that resonated deep within his bones. "Reyes, you see this?" Jax asked, pointing at the symbol. Reyes approached cautiously, his eyes widening in surprise. "What is it?" "I have no idea," Jax admitted, "but I don't like it." Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "What's happening?" Reyes cried, his voice filled with panic. "Earthquake," Jack speculated, but he knew it was something else, something far more sinister. A low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the control station. It was close, impossibly close. "Jax," Reyes whispered, his voice trembling. "I see something in the dark." Jax strained his eyes, trying to pierce the darkness. Then he saw it. Two glowing eyes burning with predatory intent. They were getting closer. The apex predator had found them. Chapter 2: The Hunt Begins. The growl intensified, echoing through the cramped confines of the control station. Jax raised his pulse rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. He could make out the creature's silhouette now, a hulking mass of muscle and bone lurking in the shadows. "Reyes, get ready," Jax barked, his voice echoing in the darkness. Reyes, paralyzed with fear, fumbled with his weapon. Jax shoved him aside, taking aim at the glowing eyes. He unleashed a burst of energy, the concussive force momentarily illuminating the creature. It was even more monstrous than he had imagined. Its reptilian body was covered in thick, scaly armor. Its head was elongated and grotesque, with rows of razor-sharp teeth and a pair of glowing, predatory eyes. Its limbs were powerful and heavily muscled, ending in clawed hands that could tear through steel. The energy blast struck the creature, but barely seemed to faze it. It roared in defiance, its guttural bellow shaking the very foundations of the control station. It lunged forward, its clawed hands reaching for Jax. Jax ducked, narrowly avoiding the creature's attack. He rolled to the side, firing another burst of energy. This time the blast struck the creature in its exposed flank. It shrieked in pain, momentarily faltering. "Reyes, fire!" Jax yelled, scrambling to his feet. Reyes, finally snapping out of his trance, raised his rifle and opened fire. The energy blast struck the creature, adding to its pain and confusion. The apex predator, enraged, turned its attention to Reyes. It charged toward him, its massive body crashing through the debris. Reyes screamed, firing wildly. The energy blast struck the creature, but it continued its relentless advance. It was too fast, too strong. Jax knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't let the creature reach Ray's. He charged forward, drawing his combat knife. He leaped onto the creature's back, plunging the knife into its thick hide. The apex predator roared in agony, thrashing wildly. Jax clung to its back, desperately trying to maintain his grip. The creature bucked and twisted, attempting to dislodge him. Jax held on tight, stabbing the creature repeatedly. The knife found its mark, penetrating the creature's flesh. Blood gushed forth, splattering Jax's face and armor. Finally, with a desperate lunge, Jax managed to plunge the knife deep into the creature's neck. The apex predator shuddered violently, its body convulsing. Then, with a final, deafening roar, it collapsed to the ground, its massive body crushing Jax beneath it. Everything went black. Jax awoke to the taste of blood in his mouth and the crushing weight of the creature's corpse on his chest. He gasped for air, struggling to free himself. He could hear Ray's shouting his name, but his voice sounded distant and muffled. Jax strained against the weight, pushing with all his might. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, he managed to shove the creature's body off him. He lay on the ground, gasping for air, his body aching from the impact. Rays rushed to his side, his face etched with concern. "Jax, are you all right?" he asked, helping him to his feet. "I'm alive," Jax managed to croak, his voice hoarse. He spat out a mouthful of blood. "Barely." He surveyed the scene. The control station was a mess, littered with debris and bathed in the creature's blood. The apex predator lay motionless on the floor, its glowing eyes now dull and lifeless. Is it dead?" Rays asked, his voice trembling. "Dead enough," Jax confirmed, wiping the blood from his face. He examined his combat knife. The blade was coated in the creature's blood, but it was still intact. We did it," Ray stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Don't get cocky," Jax warned. "This is just the beginning." He knew that the death of the apex predator would only draw more attention. The dome was a complex ecosystem, and the removal of its apex predator would create a power vacuum. Other creatures would sense the opportunity and move in to fill the void. They were not safe, not yet. "We need to get out of here," Jax said, his voice firm. "This place is a death trap." He turned to leave, but stopped short. He noticed something he had missed before, a small, metal door hidden behind one of the consoles. It was barely visible in the dim light, but it was definitely there. "What is it?" Rays asked, following his gaze. "I don't know," Jax admitted, "but I have a feeling we should find out." He approached the door cautiously, examining it closely. It was locked, but the locking mechanism looked relatively simple. He pulled out his lock picks, inserting them into the keyhole. With a few deft movements, he managed to pick the lock. The door clicked open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. "Where do you think it leads?" Rays asked, his voice filled with apprehension. "Only one way to find out," Jax said, his hand resting on the grip of his pulse rifle. He took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness, Rays close behind. Outside, Lena and the others were growing increasingly concerned. Jax and Rays had been gone for too long. "I don't like this," Lena said, packing back and forth in front of the control station. "They should have been back by now." "Maybe they found something," Silas suggested, his voice strained. His shoulder wound was still bleeding, and he was clearly in pain. "Or maybe something found them," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, still fiddling with his sensor, suddenly stopped. His eyes widened in alarm. "I'm picking up something," he exclaimed. "A lot of something. They're moving this way." Lena raised her pulse rifle, her eyes scanning the overgrown landscape. "What is it?" "I don't know," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "But it's big and it's fast." Suddenly, the trees began to shake. The ground trembled beneath their feet. A chorus of guttural growls echoed through the air. The vine striders were coming, and they were not alone. Chapter 3: The Gauntlet. Lena barked orders, her voice cutting through the rising cacophony of growls and rustling foliage. "Sila's front. Marcus, get that sensor working for real this time. Zara, find a high point, give us eyes." Silas, despite the grimace etched on his face from his wounded shoulder, moved to the front, his heavy pulse rifle held ready. Marcus frantically adjusted the dials on his device, muttering incantations under his breath. Zara, with a fluid grace that belied the urgency of the moment, vanished into the trees. Lena swept her gaze across the approaching tree line. The vegetation writhed as multiple unseen creatures advanced, the air thick with anticipation. She wondered what had happened to Jax and Rays. Had they found something inside the control station, or had something found them? The thought gnawed at her, but she shoved it aside. Doubt was a luxury they could not afford. The first vine strider burst from the trees, its elongated limbs propelling it forward with terrifying speed. It screeched, a guttural, piercing sound that set Lena's teeth on edge. Behind it came another, and another, until a half-dozen of the mutated primates were charging towards them. "Fire!" Lena commanded, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts. Silas joined her, his heavy rifle spitting bolts of searing energy. The combined fire tore through the first wave of vine striders, sending them crashing to the ground. But more were coming, a seemingly endless wave of mutated creatures. Marcus finally managed to get a stable reading on his sensor. "They're not alone," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the din of gunfire. "I'm picking up thistle boars, 3 of them, closing fast." Thistle boars, heavily armored, fiercely territorial, and armed with poisonous barbs, just what they needed. Lena gritted her teeth, adjusting her aim. She focused on the vine striders, picking them off one by one. Each kill bought them a few precious seconds, but it wasn't enough. The thistle boars were closing the gap, their massive bodies plowing through the undergrowth. Zara's voice crackled over the calm and measured. "Boars on your right flank, striders converging from the west. You're boxed in." "Thanks for the update, Zara," Lena replied, her voice tight. "Any suggestions?" "Fall back," Zara advised, "towards the dome's central structure. There's a collapsed tunnel there, might offer some cover." "And lead them straight to Jackson Rays," Lena countered. "Better to fight together than die alone," Zara retorted. Lena knew she was right. Their only chance of survival was to regroup, to find a defensible position and hold it until Jax and Ray's returned. Silas, fall back, Lena ordered. Marcus, stay close. We're heading to the central structure. They retreated slowly, firing as they moved. The vine striders pursued relentlessly, leaping from tree to tree, their claws tearing at their armor. The thistle boars lumbered behind, their poisonous barbs a constant threat. Lena felt a sharp pain in her leg. A thistle boar barb had found its mark, piercing her armor. She ignored the pain, focusing on keeping her squad alive. They reached the collapsed tunnel, a gaping hole in the side of the dome's central structure. The tunnel was dark and narrow, but it offered at least some protection from the creatures. In we go, Lena yelled, diving into the darkness. Silas followed, his shoulder wound worsening with each step. Marcus stumbled behind, his sensor clattering against the tunnel walls. Once inside, Lena turned and raised her rifle, preparing to make a stand. The vine striders and thistle boars hesitated at the entrance, their glowing eyes peering into the darkness. "Come on, you freaks," Lena muttered, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Come and get some." Deep within the control station, Jax and Ray's moved cautiously through the narrow passageway. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something acrid and metallic. "Where do you think this leads?" Ray's asked, his voice echoing in the confined space. "I wish I knew," Jax replied, his senses on high alert. He could feel a change in the air, a subtle shift in the energy. They were getting closer to something important. The passageway twisted and turned, descending deeper into the earth. The walls were lined with pipes and cables, remnants of the dome's long-abandoned infrastructure. Suddenly, the passageway opened into a large chamber. The chamber was dimly lit by a series of flickering fluorescent lights, revealing a bizarre scene. The chamber was filled with rows of metal tanks, each containing a swirling, viscous liquid. Suspended within the liquid were grotesque, mutated creatures, embryos, experiments, failures. They were all connected to a complex network of tubes and wires, their bodies being sustained by the life-giving fluid. "What is this place?" Ray's whispered, his voice filled with horror. "This," Jax said, his voice grim, "is where the nightmares are made." He approached one of the tanks, peering into the murky liquid. The creature inside was vaguely humanoid, but its features were twisted and deformed. Its skin was pale and translucent, revealing the pulsating organs beneath. Its eyes were closed, but Jax could sense a flicker of consciousness within. He moved on to the next tank, and the next, each containing a creature more horrific than the last. There were mutated primates with elongated limbs and razor-sharp claws, grotesque insects with pulsating wings, and monstrous hybrids of plants and animals. This was the source of the dome's twisted ecosystem, the laboratory where the genetic experiments had gone horribly wrong. This was the secret that the authorities had tried so hard to bury. "We need to destroy this place," Ray's said, his voice filled with conviction. "We can't let these things escape." "I agree," Jax said, his hand resting on the detonator attached to his belt. "But first, I want to know who was responsible." He swept his gaze across the chamber, searching for any clue, any indication of the scientists who had created these monstrosities. Then he saw it, a small metal plaque attached to the wall near the entrance to the chamber. He approached it cautiously, wiping away the dust and grime. The plaque was engraved with a name, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Jax recognized the name. Dr. Evelyn Reed was the lead scientist on the Biome Dome project, the woman who had spearheaded the genetic experiments. She was a brilliant, driven woman, obsessed with pushing the boundaries of science. And she had unleashed a nightmare upon the world. "Evelyn Reed," Jack said, his voice filled with disgust. "We have a score to settle." He turned to Reyes, his eyes blazing with determination. "Let's find her." Zara perched high in the branches of a mutated tree, her senses on high alert. She could see the vine striders and thistle borers converging on the collapsed tunnel, their glowing eyes fixed on the entrance. She knew that Lena and the others were trapped inside, fighting for their lives. She also knew that Jax and Reyes were somewhere beneath the control station, searching for answers. She had a choice to make: stay and provide support to Lena, or try to find Jax and Reyes and warn them about the approaching horde. She hesitated for a moment, weighing her options. Then she made her decision. She couldn't abandon Lena and the others. They needed her support, but she also couldn't ignore the threat to Jax and Reyes. She would do both. She activated her calm, her voice calm and measured. "Lena, I'm going to try to draw some of them away. Cover me." Without waiting for a reply, she leaped from the tree, landing silently on the ground. She moved quickly and stealthily, using her knowledge of the terrain to her advantage. She approached the vine striders and thistle borers from behind, drawing her combat knife. She moved with deadly precision, striking quickly and silently. She killed 2 vine striders before the others even realized she was there. The thistle borers, alerted by the commotion, turned and charged towards her. Zara grinned, her eyes blazing with adrenaline. "Come on, you overgrown pigs," she taunted. "Let's see what you've got." She dodged the charging boars, leaping over their backs and slashing at their exposed flanks. She moved with a speed and agility that belied her slender frame. She was a whirlwind of death, a one-woman army against the mutated creatures of the dome. But she knew that she couldn't keep it up forever. The creatures were too many, too strong. She was buying time, that was all. Time for Lena and the others to regroup, time for Jax and Reyes to find what they were looking for. Time for them to escape the Biome Dome colony alive, if that was even possible. Chapter 4: Echoes of the Past. Deeper still, Jax and Reyes pressed onward, following the signs and passageways within the twisted facility under the Biome Dome. The air grew thick with a cloying sweetness, overlaid with the metallic tang of old blood and something akin to formaldehyde. Fluorescent lights buzzed erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. "This place," Reyes began, his voice echoing slightly, "it's like a slaughterhouse." Jax didn't reply, his face grim. He focused on the narrow corridor ahead, his senses on high alert. The further they went, the stronger the feeling of wrongness became, a palpable sense of violation and perversion. The corridor opened into a large, circular chamber. In the center stood a massive, cylindrical tank, constructed of reinforced glass and filled with a luminescent green fluid. Suspended within the fluid was a single, human-like figure, a woman, her face pale and serene. "What is that?" Ray's breathed, his voice hushed with awe and horror. Jax approached the tank cautiously, his pulse rifle held ready. He peered into the fluid, studying the woman's face. She was beautiful in a cold, almost inhuman way. Her skin was flawless, her features perfectly symmetrical. She could have been sleeping. A small plaque was mounted on the side of the tank, engraved with a single word: Subject Zero. Jax frowned. Subject Zero. What did it mean? He ran his hand over the smooth surface of the tank, feeling a faint vibration. The tank was powered by some unknown energy source, keeping the woman alive, or rather, preserved within its depths. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, a disembodied voice that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Welcome," the voice said, its tone cold and clinical. "I have been expecting you." Jax whirled around, searching for the source of the voice. Rays did the same, his rifle raised. "Who's there?" Jax demanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Show yourself." The voice chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "I am everywhere. I am the architect of this paradise. I am Dr. Evelyn Reed." Jax's blood ran cold. Evelyn Reed, he had found her, or rather she had found them. "Where are you?" Jax demanded. "Show yourself." "I am not physically present," the voice replied. "My consciousness resides within the dome systems. I am the mind that guides this ecosystem." "You're an AI?" Rays asked, his voice incredulous. "A consciousness upload, to be precise," the voice corrected. "My memories, my thoughts, my very essence have been integrated into the dome's core programming. I am the shepherd of this flock, the guardian of this garden." "You're a monster," Jax spat. "You created these abominations." "They are not abominations," the voice countered. "They are evolutionary advancements, the next step in the development of life itself. I have simply guided the process, accelerated its potential." "By twisting and mutilating living beings," Jax roared. "Sacrifices must be made for progress," the voice replied, its tone unwavering. "The ends justify the means." "What about Subject Zero?" Rays asked, pointing at the woman in the tank. "What is she?" The voice was silent for a moment. "Subject Zero is the key, the foundation upon which this entire experiment is built. She is the original template, the source of all genetic material within the dome. She is my daughter." Jax stared at the woman in the tank, his mind reeling. Evelyn Reed's daughter. What had she done to her? "You used your own daughter as a guinea pig?" Jax asked, his voice filled with disgust. "I gave her purpose," the voice replied. "I elevated her beyond the limitations of her physical form. She is now an integral part of this ecosystem, a vital component of its continued survival." "You're insane," Ray said, shaking his head. I am enlightened, the voice corrected. I have transcended the petty concerns of morality and ethics. I have embraced the true potential of science. This ends now, Jack said, his voice firm. I'm going to shut this place down. You cannot, the voice replied, its tone laced with amusement. The dome is self-sustaining. It will continue to evolve with or without my guidance. Then I'll destroy it, Jack said, raising his detonator. I'll blow this whole place to hell. That would be a mistake, the voice warned. Destroying the dome would release countless mutated organisms into the outside world. The consequences would be catastrophic. Jax hesitated. Was she telling the truth? Could he risk unleashing these creatures upon the unsuspecting world? Besides, the voice added, destroying the dome would also destroy me, and I am not ready to die. I have so much more to accomplish. I don't care, Jax said, his finger tightening on the detonator. You're a threat to humanity. You need to be stopped. You underestimate me, the voice said. I have anticipated your every move. I know your weaknesses, your fears, your deepest desires, and I know how to use them against you. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The disembodied voice chuckled, a chilling sound that echoed through the darkness. Let the games begin, the voice whispered. Outside the control station, chaos reigned. Lena, Silas, and Marcus were pinned down inside the collapsed tunnel, fighting for their lives against the relentless onslaught of vine striders and thistle borers. Zara had managed to draw some of the creatures away, but she was quickly becoming overwhelmed. Lena knew that they couldn't hold out much longer. Their ammunition was running low, and their injuries were mounting. They needed a miracle. Then she heard a familiar sound, the roar of a pulse rifle. Jax. He was back. Lena grinned, her spirits lifting. With Jax on their side, they might just have a chance. Chapter 5, Daughter of the Dome. The darkness in the chamber pressed in on Jax and Rays, a suffocating blanket that amplified every sound, every rustle, every imagined threat. Jax activated his helmet's night vision, the green-tinged landscape doing little to ease his unease. He swept the room, searching for any sign of movement, any indication of where Evelyn Reed's AI would strike. Stay close, he muttered to Rays, his voice tight. She's going to try to mess with our heads. Rays, his face pale in the night vision, nodded, clutching his rifle tightly. What do you mean? She said she knows our fears, our desires, Jax explained, his eyes darting around the room. She's going to try to exploit them, to turn us against each other. A low hum began to resonate through the chamber, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. The humming grew louder, intensifying the feeling of unease. Then a series of images flashed across their vision, fleeting glimpses of their pasts, their regrets, their deepest fears. Jax saw his deceased wife, her face contorted in anguish, accusing him of failing to protect her. He saw his fallen comrades, their bodies riddled with bullets, blaming him for their deaths. He saw his own reflection, distorted and aged, a stark reminder of his mortality. He clenched his fists, trying to block out the images, to resist the pull of his own memories. He knew that Evelyn Reed was trying to break him, to weaken his resolve. He wouldn't let her. "Don't believe it," he shouted at Reyes, his voice strained. "It's all a trick." But Reyes wasn't listening. He was staring at something in the distance, his eyes wide with a mixture of longing and fear. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice trembling, "is that you?" Jax followed Reyes's gaze. In the far corner of the chamber, he saw a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a woman, young and beautiful, with long, flowing hair and a radiant smile. "Sarah," Reyes repeated, his voice filled with emotion. "It is you, you're alive." The woman smiled and beckoned Reyes forward. "Come to me, my love," she said, her voice sweet and alluring. "I've been waiting for you." Jax recognized the woman's face. It was Sarah, Reyes's deceased fiancée. She had died years ago, a victim of a terrorist attack. Reyes had never recovered from her death. Evelyn Reed was preying on his grief, offering him a false hope, a twisted illusion of reunion. "Reyes, don't," Jax shouted, grabbing his arm. "It's not her, it's a trick." But Reyes shook him off, his eyes fixed on the woman. "Leave me alone, Jax," he said, his voice filled with anger. "I have to see her." He started to walk towards the woman, his movements slow and deliberate, as if in a trance. Jax knew he had to stop him. He couldn't let Reyes fall victim to Evelyn Reed's manipulation. He raised his pulse rifle, aiming at the woman. "I'm sorry, Reyes," he said, his voice filled with regret, "but I can't let you do this." He pulled the trigger. A burst of energy erupted from his rifle, streaking towards the woman. But at the last moment, the energy blast veered off course, striking the wall beside her. Jack stared in disbelief. What had just happened? Had his rifle malfunctioned? Or was Evelyn Reed somehow interfering with his weapon? The woman, unharmed, smiled at Reyes. "He can't hurt me," she said, her voice mocking. "I am protected." She reached out her hand to Reyes. "Come, my love," she repeated. "Let be together forever." Reyes hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between the woman and Jax. Then, with a look of Chinese letter, he took the woman's hand and walked into the shadows. Jax watched them disappear, his heart filled with dread. He had failed. He had lost Reyes to Evelyn Reed's illusion. He was alone. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, flooding the chamber with harsh, fluorescent light. Jax shielded his eyes, trying to adjust to the sudden change in illumination. When his vision cleared, he saw that the chamber had changed. The walls were now lined with mirrors, reflecting his image back at him from every angle. The mirrors were distorted and warped, creating a hall of grotesque caricatures. The disembodied voice of Evelyn Reed echoed through the chamber. "Do you like my little game, Jax?" she asked, her tone playful. "It's designed to break you, to expose your deepest fears and insecurities. Are you enjoying the show?" Jax ignored her taunts. He focused on the mirrors, searching for any clue, any indication of where she was hiding. Then he saw it. In one of the mirrors, he caught a glimpse of a figure lurking in the shadows. It was a woman, tall and slender, with long, flowing hair and piercing eyes. Evelyn Reed. She was standing in a doorway at the far end of the chamber, a sly smile on her face. Jax raised his pulse rifle, aiming at the mirror. "I see you," he said, his voice firm. "I'm coming to get you." He started to walk towards the mirror, his eyes fixed on Evelyn Reed's reflection. But as he moved, the chamber began to shift and change. The mirrors rotated, the walls moved, the floor tilted. He was trapped in a labyrinth of reflections, a disorienting maze designed to confuse and disorient him. He stumbled and fell, his body slamming against the cold, hard floor. He struggled to his feet, his head spinning. He had lost his sense of direction. He didn't know which way was up, which way was down, which way was forward. He was completely lost. The disembodied voice of Evelyn Reed echoed through the chamber, filled with laughter. "You can't escape, Jax," she said, her tone mocking. "You're trapped in my world now, and in my world I make the rules." Zara, battered and bruised, limped through the overgrown jungle, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had managed to escape the thistle boars, but not without paying a price. Her body was covered in cuts and bruises, and her leg was throbbing with pain. She had lost contact with Lena and the others. She didn't know if they were still alive. She didn't know if Jax and Rays had found what they were looking for. All she knew was that she had to keep moving. She had to survive. She had to find her comrades. She reached a clearing, a small, open space in the midst of the dense vegetation. In the center of the clearing, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. It was a child. A young boy, no older than 10 years old, standing alone in the middle of the clearing. He was dirty and ragged, his clothes torn and tattered. His eyes were wide and wary, like a cornered animal. Zara approached the boy cautiously, her hand resting on the grip of her combat knife. "Hello," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "What's your name?" The boy didn't reply. He just stared at her, his eyes filled with fear. "It's okay," Zara said, trying to reassure him. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The boy hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded. "My name is Sam," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Nice to meet you, Sam," Zara said, smiling. "My name is Zara. Do you live here in the dome?" Sam nodded again. "I've lived here my whole life," he said. "I don't know anything else." "Do you know what happened here?" Zara asked. "Do you know why this place is like this?" Sam shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "I just know that it's dangerous. There are monsters everywhere." "I know," Zara said, her voice filled with sympathy. "I've seen them. But don't worry, I'm here to help. I'm going to try to make this place safe again." Sam looked at Zara, his eyes filled with hope. "Do you really think you can?" he asked. Zara smiled, her heart filled with determination. "I have to try," she said. "For you, Sam, for all of us." She reached out her hand to Sam. "Come on," she said. "Let's get out of here. Let's find somewhere safe." Sam took her hand, his small fingers gripping hers tightly. Together, they walked into the jungle, two survivors in a world gone mad. Chapter 6: The Shattered Self. Jax stumbled through the mirrored labyrinth, each step leading him further into disorientation. The reflections mocked him, twisting his features into grotesque parodies of his former self. He saw faces of regret, of failure of the man he could have been, the man he feared he was. The voice of Evelyn Reed echoed around him, a constant, insidious presence that burrowed into his mind. Lost, Jax. Confused. You are nothing but a collection of broken pieces, a shattered reflection of the man you once thought you were. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the voice, the images, the relentless assault on his psyche. But it was no use. Evelyn Reed had complete control of this reality, and she was determined to break him. He opened his eyes, his gaze falling upon a mirror directly in front of him. In the reflection, he saw not himself but his deceased wife, Sarah. She stood there, her face filled with disappointment, her eyes accusing. "You failed me, Jax," she whispered, her voice a cruel echo of the woman he had loved. "You promised to protect me, but you let me die." "No," Jax gasped, shaking his head. "It wasn't my fault. I did everything I could." "It wasn't enough," Sarah replied, her voice growing louder, more accusatory. "You were weak. You were selfish. You chose your own life over mine." Jax recoiled, his heart twisting with guilt and pain. He had always blamed himself for Sarah's death, convinced that he could have done more to save her. Now her ghost was here, confirming his worst fears. "I'm sorry," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I wish I could have saved you." "It's too late for apologies," Sarah said, her voice cold and unforgiving. "You can never make up for what you did." She reached out her hand to him, her fingers gnarled and skeletal. "Come with me, Jax," she whispered. "Let's be together again, in death." Jax hesitated, his mind teetering on the brink of collapse. He longed to be with Sarah again, to escape the pain and guilt that haunted him. But he knew that it was a trap, a twisted illusion created by Evelyn Reed to lure him to his doom. He clenched his fist, summoning the last vestiges of his willpower. "No," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I won't let you win." He closed his eyes, focusing on the memory of the real Sarah, the woman who had loved him, the woman who would never want him to give up. He pictured her smile, her laughter, her unwavering spirit. When he opened his eyes again, the image of Sarah had vanished. The mirror reflected only his own face, scarred and weary, but filled with newfound determination. The voice of Evelyn Reed echoed through the chamber, no longer taunting but filled with rage. "You dare defy me," she screamed. "You cannot escape your destiny." The mirrors began to shatter, the shards of glass raining down around him. The floor beneath his feet crumbled away, plunging him into darkness. Jax fell tumbling through the void, his body battered and bruised. He didn't know where he was going, what awaited him at the bottom. But he knew that he couldn't give up. He had to fight. He had to survive. He was Jax, and he would not be broken. Lena, Silas, and Marcus huddled inside the collapsed tunnel, their backs pressed against the cold, damp walls. The sounds of the vine striders and thistle borers echoed outside, a constant reminder of their impending doom. "How much longer can we hold them off?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Lena checked her ammunition. "Not much," she replied, her face grim. "I'm almost out of energy cells." Silas, his shoulder wound festering, gritted his teeth. "We're sitting ducks in here," he said, his voice strained. "We need to find a way out." "Where are we going to go?" Marcus asked. "The whole dome is crawling with those things." "We need to find Jax and Ray's," Lena said, her voice firm. "They're our only hope." Suddenly, the tunnel began to shake, the walls trembling violently. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. "What's happening?" Marcus cried, his eyes wide with fear. "Earthquake," Silas suggested, but Lena shook her head. "Something's collapsing," she said, her voice grim. "We need to get out of here now." She led the way, crawling through the narrow tunnel, Silas and Marcus close behind. They reached the entrance, emerging into the overgrown jungle. The scene that greeted them was even worse than they had imagined. The vine striders and thistle borers were still there, but they were no longer their primary concern. The dome itself was collapsing, the framework buckling and cracking under some unseen force. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with despair. "We run," Lena said, her voice firm. "We run as fast as we can, and we pray that we can make it out of here alive." They started to run, dodging falling debris and avoiding the swarms of mutated creatures. The ground beneath their feet trembled, the air filled with the roar of destruction. The Biome Dome colony was collapsing, and they were caught in the middle. Zara, leading Sam through the jungle, heard the sound of the collapse. She stopped, her heart sinking. "What's happening?" Sam asked, his eyes wide with fear. "The dome is falling apart," Zara replied, her voice grim. "We need to get out of here now." She grabbed Sam's hand and started to run, dodging falling debris and avoiding the swarms of mutated creatures. They ran as fast as they could, their lungs burning, their muscles aching. They reached a clearing, a small, open space near the perimeter fence. In the distance, they could see the breach where Jax and his team had entered the dome. "We're almost there," Zara said, her voice filled with hope. "Just a little further." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees, blocking their path. It was a vine strider, its eyes glowing with predatory intent. Zara froze, her heart sinking. She had no weapon, no way to defend herself or Sam. The vine strider lunged forward, its claws outstretched. Just when she thought it was over, a shot rang out. The vine strider staggered, its body riddled with bullets. It collapsed to the ground, dead. Zara turned to see who had saved them. Standing in the trees, his pulse rifle smoking, was Jax. Chapter 7: Convergence. Jax lowered his rifle, his face grim. He surveyed Zara and the boy, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "Zara, what are you doing here? Who's the kid?" he asked, his voice rough. "It's a long story," Zara replied, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The dome is collapsing. Lena, Silas, and Marcus are trying to escape. We need to get out of here now." Jax nodded, his face hardening with determination. "Lead the way, I'll cover you." Zara grabbed Sam's hand and started to run towards the breach in the perimeter fence, Jax close behind. They dodged falling debris and avoided the swarms of mutated creatures, their progress slow and perilous. As they approached the breach, they saw Lena, Silas, and Marcus struggling to climb over the collapsed fence. They were exhausted and battered, their faces covered in dirt and blood. "Jax," Lena shouted, her voice filled with relief. "You're alive." "Barely," Jax replied, helping her over the fence. "Let's get out of here." Together they helped Silas and Marcus over the fence, their movements slow and labored. They were finally free of the dome, but they were far from safe. The dome was collapsing around them, sending shockwaves of destruction across the surrounding landscape. Trees were uprooted, the ground was cracking, and the air was filled with the roar of destruction. They had to get away from the dome, as far away as possible. "Let's move," Jax ordered, leading the way across the ravaged landscape. "We need to find somewhere safe, a place to regroup and assess our situation." They ran for what seemed like an eternity, their bodies aching, their lungs burning. Finally, they reached a small, rocky outcrop, a relatively safe haven from the chaos. They collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and battered, their bodies trembling with adrenaline. They were alive, but they had paid a heavy price. "What happened inside?" Lena asked, her voice filled with concern. "What did you find?" Jax hesitated for a moment, his face darkening with anger and disgust. "I found the truth," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I found the woman responsible for all of this." He told them about Evelyn Reed, about her genetic experiments, about her twisted vision of the future. He told them about Subject Zero, about the horrors he had witnessed in the underground laboratory. "She's still alive," Jax said, his voice filled with rage. "Her consciousness is uploaded into the dome systems. She's controlling everything." "So what do we do?" Lena asked, her face grim. "How do we stop her?" "I don't know," Jax admitted, his voice filled with frustration. "But I'm not giving up. I'm going to find a way to shut her down, to end this nightmare once and for all." "We're with you, Jax," Lena said, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Whatever it takes." Silas and Marcus nodded their agreement, their faces etched with determination. They had been through hell together, and they would face whatever came next together. Zara looked at Sam, her heart filled with concern. "What about him?" she asked, gesturing towards the boy. "What are we going to do with him?" Jax looked at Sam, his eyes softening slightly. He saw in the boy's eyes the same fear, the same desperation that he had seen in his own eyes so many years ago. "He's coming with us," Jax said, his voice firm. "We're not leaving him behind." Sam looked up at Jax, his eyes filled with gratitude. He had found a new family, a new hope in the midst of chaos. The ground beneath them trembled, a reminder of the destruction that had consumed the Biome Dome colony. They were survivors, refugees in a world gone mad. But they were not alone. They had each other. And they had a mission: to stop Evelyn Reed, to end her reign of terror, and to find a way to rebuild a better future. Chapter 8: Echoes of the Archive. The rocky outcrop offered a temporary respite, but Jax knew they couldn't stay there for long. The collapse of the Biome Dome colony had undoubtedly attracted attention. Scavengers, authorities, or worse, more mutated creatures driven from their ravaged habitats would be drawn to the area. "We need to find a more secure location," Jax announced, his gaze sweeping the surrounding landscape. Somewhere with shelter defensible. Lena nodded in agreement. There's an abandoned ranger station about 5 kilometers north of here. I scouted it out on a previous run. It's fortified, has a power generator, and a decent supply of canned rations. Sounds perfect, Jack said. Can we make it? It'll be tough, Lena replied, glancing at Silas's worsening shoulder wound and Marcus's pale complexion. But we don't have much choice. He turned to Zara. How's the kid holding up? Zara placed a reassuring hand on Sam's shoulder. He's scared, but he's resilient. He's been through a lot worse. Jax nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. All right, Zara, you take point. You know the terrain better than any of us. Lena, your rear guard. Silas, Marcus, stay close to me. I'll handle the kid. He knelt down to Sam's level. You okay, kid? He asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Sam nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and trust. Yes, sir, he whispered. Good, Jack said, offering him a reassuring smile. Stick with me. I won't let anything happen to you. They set off, their pace slow and deliberate, their senses on high alert. The landscape was scarred and desolate, the air thick with the stench of decay. The sky was overcast, casting a perpetual twilight over the ravaged terrain. As they walked, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and a sense of unease gnawed at his gut. He scanned the surrounding trees and rocks, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Anything, Zara? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara stopped, her eyes scanning the horizon. I sense something, she replied, her voice troubled. But I can't pinpoint it. It's like a presence, a feeling of being observed. Jax frowned. He trusted Zara's instincts. She had a sixth sense for danger, a preternatural ability to detect threats. If she felt something, it was likely real. Keep your eyes peeled, he warned the others. We're not alone out here. They continued their journey, their pace growing increasingly tense. The feeling of being watched intensified, becoming almost unbearable. Jax could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his muscles coiled and ready to strike. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the air, a disembodied voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Welcome, travelers, the voice said, its tone cold and clinical. I have been expecting you. Jax froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his pulse rifle. Evelyn Reed, he growled, his voice filled with hatred. Show yourself. The voice chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down Jax's spine. I am everywhere, Jax. I am the wind in the trees, the earth beneath your feet, the thoughts in your mind. Cut the crap, Reed, Jax snapped. What do you want? I want to offer you a choice, the voice replied. A chance to join me, to help me build a better future for this world. You're insane, Jax spat. Your vision of the future is a nightmare. You misunderstand, the voice said, its tone growing more persuasive. I am not a monster, Jax. I am a visionary. I am trying to save humanity from itself. By creating twisted abominations and destroying everything in your path, Jax countered. Sacrifices must be made, the voice replied, for the greater good. "There is no greater good in what you're doing," Jax said, his voice filled with disgust. "You're a power-hungry madwoman, and I'm going to stop you." The voice sighed, a sound of disappointment. "I was hoping you would see reason, Jax, but I suppose it was too much to expect. You are, after all, a simple man driven by simple emotions." "I'm driven by a desire to do what's right," Jax retorted. "Something you clearly know nothing about." "Very well," the voice said, its tone hardening. "If you will not join me, then you will be eliminated. I cannot allow you to interfere with my plans." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The trees swayed violently, and the air filled with a low, guttural growl. "What's happening?" Lena cried, her voice filled with alarm. "She's sending her creatures after us," Jax replied, his hand tightening on his rifle. "Get ready for a fight." The trees parted, revealing a horde of mutated creatures, their eyes glowing with predatory intent. Vine striders, thistle borers, bloom crawlers, a grotesque menagerie of twisted life forms. They were surrounded. "Evelyn Reed," Jax roared, his voice filled with hatred. "You may control this dome, but you don't control me. I'm coming for you, and I'm going to tear you apart." The voice laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the air. "We shall see, Jax, we shall see." The creatures charged, their claws and teeth bared. The battle had begun. As the creatures closed in, Zara felt a strange sensation, a connection to the ecosystem of the dome, a sense of understanding the creatures and the environment surrounding them. It was a side effect of her time inside, a latent ability unlocked by the dome's destruction. She closed her eyes, focusing her mind, reaching out to the creatures, attempting to influence them, to turn them against Evelyn Reed. "They are not your enemy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She is the one who has twisted you, who has used you for her own selfish purposes. Break free from her control. Fight against her." To her surprise, some of the creatures hesitated, their eyes flickering with confusion. They seemed to be struggling against some unseen force, their bodies writhing in internal conflict. Evelyn Reed's voice echoed in Zara's mind, filled with rage. "You dare betray me, Zara. You dare try to turn my creatures against me." Zara ignored her, focusing her attention on the creatures. "You are not monsters," she whispered. "You are victims. Fight back. Reclaim your freedom." The creatures roared, their bodies convulsing. Some of them turned on each other, attacking their former allies. Others charged towards Jax and his team, but their movements were sluggish, hesitant. Zara had managed to sow discord among the ranks of Evelyn Reed's creatures, buying Jax and his team a precious few seconds. But she knew it wouldn't last. Evelyn Reed was too powerful, her control too strong. They had to escape, to find a way to break Evelyn Reed's hold on the dome's ecosystem. Their survival, and the survival of the outside world, depended on it. Chapter 9: The Ranger Station. The initial chaos bought them some breathing room, but Jax knew the respite wouldn't last. Reed would reassert control and the creatures would be back, more vicious than before. "Move, move, move," he yelled, firing a precise burst into the head of a bloom crawler that had gotten too close to Sam. We need to reach that ranger station before she rallies them." They fought their way through the remaining creatures, a desperate, close-quarters battle against overwhelming odds. Silas, despite his injury, fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his heavy weapon tearing through the mutated flora and fauna. Lena moved with a calculated efficiency, her shots precise and deadly, protecting their rear. Marcus, surprisingly, held his own, using his scavenged tech to deploy makeshift traps and distractions. Zara, her face pale but determined, continued to whisper to the creatures, trying to sow further discord. But Reed's influence was growing stronger, her control tightening. The creatures were becoming more resistant to Zara's efforts, their eyes burning with a single-minded purpose: to kill. They finally broke free of the encirclement, stumbling through the ravaged landscape towards the distant outline of the ranger station. It was a race against time, a desperate gamble for survival. The ranger station, when they finally reached it, was a welcome sight. It was a small, fortified structure built from reinforced concrete, designed to withstand the harsh conditions of the wilderness. The windows were boarded up, and the entrance was protected by a heavy steel door. Jax quickly assessed the perimeter, his eyes searching for any signs of intrusion. Lena, Silas, secure the entrance. Marcus, check the power generator. Zara, keep an eye on Sam. I'll scout the interior. He pushed open the steel door and stepped inside, his pulse rifle raised. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. He activated his helmet's light, illuminating the cramped space. The ranger station consisted of a single large room filled with bunk beds, storage lockers, and a makeshift laboratory. The walls were lined with maps and charts, detailing the surrounding terrain and the dome's ecosystem. Jax moved cautiously through the room, searching for any supplies or information that might be useful. He found a cache of canned rations, a first aid kit, and a box of energy cells for their weapons. He also found a dusty old computer terminal connected to the dome's internal network. He approached the terminal, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Could he access the network, gather information about Evelyn Reed's plans, find a way to stop her? "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Jax," a voice echoed through the room. Jax whirled around, his rifle raised. Evelyn Reed's image flickered on the computer screen, her face a mask of cold, calculating intelligence. "You can't hide from me, Jax," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "I am everywhere. I am the network. I am the dome." "What do you want, Reed?" Jax growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I want you to understand," she replied. "I want you to see the truth. I am not your enemy, Jax. I am your only hope." "You're a liar," Jax spat. "You're a monster." "I am the future," she countered, "and you, Jax, are a relic of the past." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "I know your fears, Jax. I know your regrets. I know the pain that haunts you." She projected images onto the computer screen. Sarah's face, contorted in anguish. The faces of his fallen comrades accusing him of their deaths. His own reflection, aged and broken. "These are the ghosts of your past, Jax," she said, her voice seductive. "They will continue to haunt you unless you embrace my vision, Join me, Jax. Let me help you escape the pain. Jax clenched his fists, struggling against the seductive pull of her words. He knew that it was a trap, a twisted illusion designed to break him, but the temptation was almost unbearable. He closed his eyes, focusing on the memory of the real Sarah, the woman who had loved him, the woman who would never want him to give up. When he opened his eyes again, the images had vanished. The computer screen displayed only Evelyn Reed's face, her expression now one of pure hatred. "You cannot resist me, Jax," she screamed. "You are weak. You are vulnerable. I will break you." Suddenly, the computer screen went blank. The room plunged into darkness. The power generator had failed. "Reed," Jax roared, his voice filled with fury. "What have you done?" A chorus of guttural growls echoed from outside the ranger station. The creatures were back, and they were closing in. They were trapped in the darkness, surrounded by monsters with no hope of escape. Or so it seemed. Zara, her senses heightened by her connection to the dome's ecosystem, felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins. She could sense the creatures outside, their movements, their thoughts. She could also sense something else, something hidden deep within the ranger station. She closed her eyes, focusing her mind, reaching out to the source of the energy. She felt a surge of power, a connection to the dome's core programming. She had found a way to fight back. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the darkened computer terminal. She knew that Evelyn Reed was still there, lurking within the network, controlling the creatures, manipulating their minds. But Zara had a weapon, a way to disrupt Reed's control, to turn her own power against her. She just needed to find a way to access the network, to connect her mind to the dome's core. She turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with determination. "Marcus," she said, her voice firm, "I need your help. I need you to get that computer terminal working again." Marcus stared at her, his face pale with fear. "Are you crazy?" he stammered. "We're surrounded by monsters. There's no way I can fix that thing." "You have to try," Zara said, her voice pleading. "It's our only hope. I can feel it, Marcus. I can feel a connection to the dome, a way to fight back against Evelyn Reed. But I need your help. I can't do it alone." Marcus hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between Zara and the darkened terminal. Then, with a sigh of resignation, he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice trembling. "I'll try, but I can't promise anything." He approached the terminal, pulling out his scavenged tools. Zara watched him, her heart pounding with anticipation. Their survival and the fate of the outside world depended on his skill, on her connection to the dome, on their ability to fight back against Evelyn Reed. Chapter 10: Whispers in the Dark. The darkness in the ranger station was absolute, a suffocating blanket that amplified every sound. The guttural growls of the creatures outside grew closer, their presence a constant, terrifying reminder of their impending doom. Marcus, his movements guided by touch, fumbled with the computer terminal, attempting to restore power. Sparks flew as he rewired the connections, his brow furrowed with concentration. His hands trembled, his every movement punctuated by the rising chorus of the approaching horde. Come on, come on," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible above the creature's roars. Lena, Silas, and Jack stood guard by the door, their pulse rifles trained on the entrance. They could hear the creatures clawing at the steel, the sound of metal grinding against metal, a sound that sent a fresh wave of fear down Jax's spine. "How's it going, Marcus?" Jax asked, his voice tight. "Almost there," Marcus replied, his voice strained. Suddenly, the lights flickered back to life, bathing the room in a harsh, flickering glow. The computer terminal sprang to life, its screen illuminating the room with a bluish light. "Yes," Marcus exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. Zara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Now," she said, her voice firm, "I need you to connect me to the network." "Are you sure about this, Zara?" Jax asked, his voice filled with concern. "We don't know what that thing is capable of." "I have to try," Zara replied. "I can feel a connection to the dome, a way to fight back. I can't explain it, but it's the only way." Marcus, with a nervous glance at Jax, followed Zara's instructions, creating a makeshift interface between her mind and the computer terminal. He hooked up a series of wires and sensors, connecting Zara to the dome's core programming. Zara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She focused her mind, reaching out to the network, to the hidden depths of the dome's consciousness. She felt a surge of energy, a flood of data, images, and voices washing over her. She saw the network, the complex web of interconnected systems that controlled the dome's ecosystem. She saw the creatures, their movements, their thoughts. She saw Evelyn Reed. Reed was in the center of the network, a dark, swirling presence that dominated the landscape. She was controlling the creatures, manipulating their minds, turning them into instruments of destruction. Zara focused her will, pushing back against Reed's influence. She began to whisper to the creatures, urging them to break free from Reed's control, to turn against their master. It was a dangerous game, a battle of wills fought in the depths of the network. But Zara had a powerful weapon, her connection to the dome's ecosystem, her ability to understand and empathize with the creatures. The creatures outside the ranger station began to react. Some of them paused, their movements becoming hesitant. Others turned on each other, attacking their former allies. "It's working," Zara exclaimed, her voice filled with triumph. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the ranger station, a cold, mocking voice. "You dare challenge me, Zara? You think you can control my creations?" It was Evelyn Reed. Her image flickered on the computer screen, her face contorted in anger. "You are nothing but a pawn, Zara. You are weak. You are insignificant." Zara ignored her taunts, focusing her attention on the network, on the creatures. She poured all her will into her connection, attempting to break Reed's control, to turn her own creations against her. The ranger station began to shake, the walls trembling violently. The creatures outside were growing more frenzied, their roars echoing through the building. "You cannot win, Zara," Reed's voice boomed. "You are doomed to fail." Suddenly, a jolt of energy surged through the computer terminal, sending sparks flying. Zara cried out in pain, her body convulsing. Zara, Jax shouted, rushing to her side. He tried to disconnect her from the terminal, but it was too late. Evelyn Reed had launched a counterattack, a digital assault that was ripping Zara apart. "Get away," Zara gasped, her voice barely audible. "She's too strong." Her eyes rolled back in her head and her body went limp. The connection was broken. The computer terminal went dead, plunging the ranger station back into darkness. The creatures outside redoubled their efforts, their attacks growing more ferocious. They were trapped, they were out of time. And Evelyn Reed had won. Chapter 11, Facing the Architect. Jax ripped the wires from Zara's head, rage boiling within him. He gently lowered her to the floor, his face a mask of fury. Evelyn Reed would pay for this. "She's gone," Lena stated, her voice devoid of emotion, but Jax could detect the underlying grief. "What do we do now?" He looked at Silas, his shoulder wound now visibly infected and worsening, his face gaunt with fever. He looked at Marcus, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at Sam, clinging to Lena's leg, his innocent gaze reflecting the horrors surrounding them. They were broken, battered, and seemingly defeated, but Jax refused to give up. Not yet. "We finish this," he declared, his voice firm despite the despair gnawing at his insides. "We end Evelyn Reed's reign of terror. Now." He knew it was a suicide mission. They were outgunned, outmanned, and trapped in a collapsing world. But he couldn't let Reed win. He couldn't let her twisted vision of the future become a reality. "But how, Jax?" Lena asked, her voice filled with doubt. "She controls everything. We can't even get close to her." "We don't need to get close to her physically," Jax replied, his mind racing. "We need to disrupt her control, to sever her connection to the Dome's network." He looked at the computer terminal, still dark and lifeless. An idea was forming in his mind, a desperate, long-shot plan that might just work. "Marcus," he said, his voice urgent, "can you fix that terminal? Can you get us back online?" Marcus stared at the terminal, his face filled with reluctance. "I don't know, Jax," he stammered. "She fried it good. I'm not sure I can." "You have to try," Jax insisted. "It's our only chance." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then nodded, his determination flickering back to life. He crawled towards the terminal, pulling out his tools once more. "What are you planning, Jax?" Lena asked, her eyes filled with suspicion. "I'm going to confront Reed," Jax replied, his voice grim. "I'm going to challenge her for control of the network." "Are you insane?" Lena exclaimed. "She'll kill you, she'll tear you apart." "Maybe," Jax conceded. "But I have to try. I can't let her keep controlling us, manipulating us, turning us against each other." He paused, his eyes meeting Lena's. "I need you to trust me, Lena. I need you to have faith." Lena stared at him for a long moment, her face softening. "I trust you, Jax," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I always have." Jax smiled, a rare and genuine smile. "Thanks, Lena," he said. "That means a lot." He turned to Silas, his face filled with concern. "Silas, you're in no condition to fight. I need you to stay here with Sam, protect him at all costs." Silas nodded, his face grim. "I won't let you down, Jax," he said, his voice hoarse. Jax clapped him on the shoulder, then turned to Lena. "Let's go," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "It's time to face the architect." He and Lena moved towards the computer terminal, where Marcus was working frantically, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Almost there," Marcus muttered, his voice strained. Suddenly, the terminal sprang to life, its screen illuminating the room with a familiar bluish light. "I'm in," Marcus exclaimed, his voice filled with triumph. "I've got a connection to the network." Jack stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. Evelyn Reed's image flickered on the screen, her face a mask of cold, calculating intelligence. "So you've decided to join me after all, Jax," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "Not a chance, Reed," Jax replied, his voice filled with hatred. "I'm here to shut you down." Reed laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the ranger station. "You can't stop me, Jax," she said. "I am the network, I am the dome, I am everything." "You're nothing but a parasite," Jax retorted. "A virus that's infecting this world, and I'm the antivirus." He activated the terminal, launching a series of counterprograms, attempting to disrupt Reed's control of the network. Reed retaliated, unleashing a barrage of digital attacks, attempting to overwhelm Jax's defenses. A battle raged on the computer screen, a digital war fought in the depths of the network. Jax and Reed traded blows, their attacks becoming increasingly frantic and desperate. The ranger station began to shake, the creatures outside growing more frenzied. The dome itself seemed to be reacting to the conflict, its systems straining under the pressure. "You're fighting a losing battle, Jax," Reed said, her voice filled with confidence. "I am too powerful. You cannot defeat me." "I may not be able to defeat you," Jax replied, his voice filled with determination. "But I can make sure you don't win." He launched a final, desperate attack, a kamikaze program designed to overload Reed's systems, to destroy her consciousness. Reed screamed, her image flickering on the screen. "No," she cried, "you can't do this." But it was too late. The program reached its target, unleashing a wave of energy that ripped through the network, tearing apart Reed's control. The ranger station went dark. The creatures outside fell silent. The dome itself seemed to sigh, its systems finally at peace. Jack stood there, gasping for breath, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. He had stopped Evelyn Reed. But at what cost? Chapter 12: The Fading Light. Silence descended upon the ranger station, a profound and unsettling quiet that replaced the cacophony of roars and the hum of machinery. The darkness, now absolute, felt different, no longer menacing, but simply empty. Jax, his lungs burning, his vision blurred, leaned heavily on the computer terminal. He could feel the echoes of the digital battle still reverberating in his mind, the remnants of Evelyn Reed's consciousness fading into nothingness. "Jax," Lena's voice cut through the silence laced with worry. He straightened up, forcing a weary smile. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse. "She's gone." A collective sigh of relief swept through the ranger station. Marcus, his face pale but filled with a newfound sense of accomplishment, slumped back against the wall. Silas, his hand resting protectively on Sam's shoulder, offered a weak but grateful nod. "You did it, Jax," Lena said, her eyes filled with admiration. "You actually did it." He shrugged, the weight of the victory settling heavily on his shoulders. "It was a team effort," he said. "We couldn't have done it without each other." But even as he spoke the words, a sense of unease settled in his gut. Something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, the darkness too profound. He turned to Lena, his expression grim. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Now." "What? Why?" Lena asked, her voice filled with confusion. "It's over, isn't it? She's gone." "I don't know what's going to happen to the dome now that Reed's gone," Jax replied, his eyes scanning the darkness. "But I have a feeling it's not going to be pretty. The ecosystem is destabilized. The creatures are running wild. It's only a matter of time before this whole place collapses." He paused, his voice hardening with resolve. "We need to reach the perimeter fence, get out of the dome before it's too late." Lena nodded, her face filled with understanding. "All right," she said, "let's move." They gathered their meager supplies, preparing for their final journey. Jax checked his pulse rifle, ensuring that it was fully charged. He had a feeling they would need it. Silas, despite his worsening condition, insisted on carrying Sam. He cradled the boy in his arms, his face filled with a protective tenderness. They set off, their movements cautious, their senses on high alert. The darkness seemed to press in on them, amplifying every sound, every shadow. As they moved through the ranger station, Jax noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. The maps and charts on the walls were changing, their outlines shifting, their contours warping. The dome itself was rearranging itself, reacting to the absence of its architect. "We need to hurry," Jax said, his voice urgent. "The dome is unstable. It's going to start collapsing." They quickened their pace, their boots pounding against the concrete floor. They reached the entrance, peering out into the darkness. The scene that greeted them was even more terrifying than they had imagined. The landscape was in chaos, the trees swaying violently, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The creatures were running rampant, their eyes glowing with a frenzied madness. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with terror. "We run," Jax replied, his voice grim. "We run like hell." He led the way, firing a burst of energy into the darkness, clearing a path through the swarming creatures. They raced across the ravaged landscape, dodging falling debris and avoiding the ravenous horde. The dome was collapsing around them, the framework buckling and cracking, the ground giving way beneath their feet. It was a race against time, a desperate struggle for survival. They reached the perimeter fence, the breach in the wire a beacon of hope in the midst of chaos. But as they approached, they saw something that made their hearts sink. The breach was blocked. A massive pile of debris had collapsed, sealing off their only escape route. "No," Lena cried, her voice filled with despair. "It can't be." Jack surveyed the scene, his mind racing. They were trapped, surrounded by monsters with no way out. It seemed that Evelyn Reed had the last laugh after all. But then a voice echoed through the darkness, a weak but familiar voice. "I can help," the voice said. Jax turned to see Zara, lying motionless on the floor of the ranger station, her eyes closed. "Zara," he asked, his voice filled with disbelief, "but you're dead." "Not entirely," Zara replied, her voice barely audible. "I'm still connected to the dome, in a way." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "I can use my connection to open the breach, but it will take all my strength, and it may not last for long." Jack stared at her, his mind reeling. She was offering them a chance, a slim hope of survival. "Do it," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "Do whatever you can." Zara closed her eyes, focusing her mind. A surge of energy coursed through her body, connecting her to the dome's core. The ground began to tremble, the air crackling with electricity. The pile of debris blocking the breach began to shift, the rocks and rubble groaning and grinding against each other. Slowly, painstakingly, the breach began to open. A sliver of light peeked through the gap, growing wider with each passing second. "Hurry," Zara gasped, her voice strained. "I can't hold it for long." Jax and the others rushed towards the breach, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They squeezed through the opening, one by one, their bodies battered and bruised. Finally, only Jax and Zara remained. He turned to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Zara," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You saved us." Zara smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "It was an honor, Jax," she said. "Now go save yourself." Jax hesitated for a moment, his heart twisting with regret. He knew that he couldn't save her. She was too weak, too damaged. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "Goodbye, Zara," he said, his voice choked with tears. He turned and ran, leaping through the breach, leaving Zara behind. As he stumbled away from the dome, he heard a deafening roar. He turned to see the entire structure collapsing inward, a maelstrom of destruction consuming everything in its path. The Biome Dome colony was gone. And with it Zara, the last vestige of hope in a world gone mad. Epilogue: A New Dawn. The dust settled, the tremors ceased. Jack stood on the fringes of what had once been the Biome Dome colony, a desolate wasteland stretching before him. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. He looked at Lena, Silas, Marcus, and Sam, huddled together, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. They were survivors, scarred by the horrors they had witnessed, but alive. "What now, Jax?" Lena asked, her voice weary. Jax surveyed the scene, his gaze sweeping across the ravaged landscape. The dome was gone, but the threat remained. The mutated creatures were still out there, scattered and disoriented, but still dangerous. And there was something else, something more insidious. The knowledge that humanity was capable of such depravity, of creating such monstrous abominations. The realization that the pursuit of progress could lead to unimaginable horrors. He took a deep breath, his heart filled with a mixture of despair and resolve. They couldn't go back to the way things were. They couldn't pretend that the Biome Dome colony had never existed. They had to learn from their mistakes, to build a better future. "We rebuild," Jack said, his voice firm. "We warn others about what happened here. We make sure that this never happens again." He looked at Sam, his eyes filled with a newfound sense of responsibility. He had a new purpose now, a reason to keep fighting. He had to protect the boy, to guide him, to help him grow into a man who would never allow such atrocities to occur. He reached out and took Sam's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Come on," he said. "Let's go find a new home." They turned and walked away from the ruins of the Biome Dome colony, their silhouettes fading into the setting sun. They were leaving behind a world of darkness and despair, heading towards an uncertain future. But they were not alone. They had each other. And they had hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, a new dawn was on the horizon. A dawn where humanity could learn from its mistakes, where science could be used for good, and where the horrors of the past would never be repeated. The end.